How would the FBI have approached the Madeleine McCann case? I'm Deception Detective. I'm an attorney trained in statement analysis, and this channel exists to expose lies and manipulation. Before we proceed, please hit the like button, subscribe button, and the notification bell. In today's video, I'm going to take you through a very important analysis. We're going to look at the first two appeals the McCanns made right when Madeleine went missing on May 4th and May 5th, 2007, and put them through the filter that the FBI would have put them through. So let's listen to the first appeal, and then I'll show you the filter I'm talking about. I already sent this to our members, and we'll apply it to the situation as best we can.
Words cannot describe.
Mrs. McCann clutched a child's toy while her husband spoke.
Words cannot describe the anguish and despair that we are feeling as the parents of our beautiful daughter Madeleine. We request that anyone who may have any information related to Madeleine's disappearance, no matter how trivial, contact the Portuguese police and help us get her back safely. Please, if you have Madeleine, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother and sister.
That was the first appeal that the McCanns made. And the reason I'm doing this video with the McCanns is simply because the McCanns are back in the news. It's part of an ongoing series I'm doing of them. So I've done 8 videos on the McCanns. You can watch this playlist if you want to see them all. And this is now the 9th video of the McCanns. And one thing I mentioned in my Amanda Knox series was 911 calls. And lots of people commented wanting to understand how to assess a 911 emergency call to tell if the person making the call is guilty or innocent. And I think people are fascinated with 911 calls because in lots of true crime documentaries and shows, they typically play the 911 call. And intuitively, people understand that a guilty person will probably say something that an innocent person won't. So for the members of the channel, I did this post right around the time of recording. I posted this 16 minutes ago. And if you're listening on podcast mode, this is a checklist. Specifically, it's an FBI emergency call assessment checklist. And this is essentially the best practices the FBI suggests to assess an emergency 911 call. And since I don't have the 911 call of the McCanns, I want to run these early press conferences they did through this filter. Because just like a 911 call, the press conference should have the same priorities because they are appealing to the public, to officials to help them solve an emergency, an ongoing, fresh emergency, their missing daughter. And if you're listening on podcast mode, I'll just walk you through these criteria. And all these criteria come from studies. So it's not just a psychologist sitting down and saying, what would a guilty person say? Or what would an innocent person say? It has to do with actual studies of about 100 911 calls that were made, where half were innocent people, half were guilty people, and by guilty, they were actually convicted of the crime. And a statement analyst was actually involved in the creation of this list. So the first big question when you're analyzing an emergency call, or in this case, when we're going to listen to that appeal again, is what was the call about? What is the message of the person making the statement? And innocent people typically do 4 things in this category. They request help for the victim. They provide relevant information. They express concern for the victim, and they correct facts. So if you hear on a 911 call someone say, hey, a guy's just been shot, and the police say, okay, can you check their pulse? And, they go over and they say, actually, I'm feeling for the pulse. This is actually a woman, not a man. That's actually a good sign. It means that they're updating the facts in real time as we get them. And if you've seen my other McCann videos, you understand that a big red flag for me with these parents is they never update the facts of their story. They never add any additional information, which is one reason I believe their story is scripted. And I've done about 2 videos on the way I think their story is scripted. So, when innocent people make a call or an appeal like this, they request help for the victim, they provide relevant info, they express concern for the victim, and they correct any incorrect facts. Guilty callers, however, do not request help for the victim. Often what they do is they request help for themselves. So they might phrase something like, 911's your emergency. Hello, I've got a problem. My son isn't waking up. So rather than saying something like, my son isn't waking up, help, I need help here now, here's my address, they say, I've got a problem. So their priority is themselves, which is a big red flag for guilty callers. The help they're requesting is for themselves, not for the victim. In the case of the McCanns, I think we're going to notice that they fail this one here in this press conference. The second thing is they provide a lot of extraneous information. So whereas innocent callers are trying to just relay facts, the address, what's going on, and try to get help there as quickly as possible and make it as easy as possible for people to understand what they need. Guilty callers, guilty appeals typically have extraneous information. So they have extra info, and usually that info is related to the crime itself. So they're trying to create a narrative. They're trying to persuade people of something that happened. They're trying to persuade people of their alibi. And in the case of the McCanns, we see this all the time with them, where there's a distinct lack of concern for Madeleine, and lots of the info they provide is pointing towards their narrative of a third-party person coming in and kidnapping her. They spend a lot of time talking about the crime itself rather than the victim, Madeleine. And we've seen like 4 interviews of them now. We analyzed 3 or 4 interviews of them now with various people. And each time they have to be prompted to bring up Madeleine's unique eye fleck, which would actually help her be identified. Whereas they go out of their way to provide info about the open window and the potential that someone kidnapped her. And then finally, guilty callers typically have conflicting facts. So they might say something like, my baby's not waking up. And then, if 911 caller says, has she been breathing okay? And they say, yeah, she's been breathing fine for hours. She just is not waking up now. And then 911 says, okay, what were you doing a few minutes ago? They say, well, I was just woken up by a phone call. Right? So they conflict. Were you either monitoring the baby for the last few hours to make sure they were fine, or were you just woken up by a phone call? Which is different from correction of facts. Right? So just because new facts are added does not make the person guilty. The new facts that are added have to conflict with existing facts. So there's 2 more sections, but let's listen to this call and run it through this first filter of what was the call about. What was this first appeal about?
Mrs. McCann clutched a child's toy while her husband spoke.
Words cannot describe the anguish and despair that we are feeling as the parents of our beautiful daughter, Madeleine.
So already we're talking about their anguish and their despair. Does this mean that they are guilty parents? No, not necessarily. But if we are going to check on our checklist, they have not requested help for the victim yet. I think they do later though, right? So let's run it through the filter because we have 2 more filters to run it through. And by the end of this video, you should be able to run any 911 call that you see on TV through this filter, the same way the FBI would. I don't know if they've updated this in the last few years though, but this is the FBI's best practices checklist for 911 dispatchers. And then also, if someone's trying to scam you, for example, calling you and say, hey, I need help. I need you to wire money to X, Y, and Z, some third cousin, some distant relative, you'll be able to tell if it's actually sincere or not.
We request that anyone who may have any information related to Madeline's disappearance, no matter how trivial, contact the Portuguese police and help us get her back safely. Please, if you have Madeline, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother and sister.
All right, so that was the first filter. Did they request help for the victim? They asked people if they had info to provide the info. Was the information they provided relevant? Not necessarily. In fact, the information they provided there was very useless. They didn't describe what Madeline looks like. They didn't say, what she was wearing for people to be on the lookout for. What if Madeline wandered away and she was just wandering around town? They didn't describe the pajamas she was in, her unique eye fleck. So the information they provided was actually very minimal. It wasn't very useful if they actually believe she's out there. Nor did they offer some sort of appeal to whoever kidnapped her, saying, we're willing to pay. And you do see this with other parents of missing children. They say, please just drop her off and we will forgive you. We won't ask any questions. Just leave her at the nearest library, right? Or the nearest police station. Please, we won't pursue you. We won't look for you. There's none of that here. And Madeline's just gone missing. The third criteria here, is there concern for the victim? Do they express concern for Madeline? No, there's no curiosity about what she's going through. So that's absent here. And then as far as correction of facts goes, we didn't see any of that because there's actually so few facts that they provided here. Okay, the next criteria. And there are 2 appeals here. So let's go through the next criteria and then we'll watch the second appeal, which I've not watched yet, and see if that has more info for us to analyze, just so we're listening to something fresh. The second set of criteria. So when you're assessing a 911 call, in this case, we're assessing a press conference appeal for a missing girl. So it's not 1-for-1. I'm sort of shoehorning this lesson into the McCanns case because I think it's an important lesson to cover. And I wanted to put it into my Amanda Knox series, which we're still working on. But the initial 911 call was in Italian, made by Raffaele Sollecito. So I don't have a 911 call from that case either. But I want to get this lesson out there because I think it's useful. And these early press conferences are not in the heightened state one would make in the middle of an emergency of a 911 call. However, the emergency is still ongoing. Madeline is still missing and she just went missing. So I'm making an audible judgment call here. I think it's still appropriate to teach this lesson here. And I know in the comments lots of people will be saying I'm shoehorning it. I openly admit I'm shoehorning it here. I want to get this lesson out there. I think the McCanns are the videos that you guys are most likely to watch right now just because the McCanns are back in the news. And I want my members and my subscribers to have this filter. I want to give you FBI level skills here. That's the whole reason I came back to YouTube, is to help people spot liars, manipulators, and the thing I hate personally, which is sadists. All right, who was the call about? This is our second group of questions. Innocent callers request help for the victim. They focus on the victim's survival, and they do not accept the victim's death. So, for example, if someone's calling the police, and the police say, check their pulse, let's say a mother says, my boy's on the ground, he hit his head really hard, and they say, check for a pulse, and she says, I don't have a pulse here. He needs help. Send someone here now. I don't have a pulse. Well, if there's no pulse, her son is dead. But A mother in the heat of the moment is not going to accept the death. So that is an innocent caller. And there's actually a transcript very similar to that in this study. So it's very sad, right? So the kid has no pulse. The kid is actually rigid from being, from death. But the mother is still requesting help urgently. Get a 911 here. What are you guys doing? So there's no acceptance of death. Guilty callers, on the other hand, the help is requested for themselves. So even saying something as seemingly innocuous as, I've got a problem here. My baby's not breathing. That is a red flag way to phrase the question. And in this study, there is also an example of someone saying exactly that. And it was later revealed that the baby died due to shaken baby syndrome. So the father shook the kid so hard, the kid passed away. And when he called the police, the way he phrased it was, I need help. The guilty callers also focus on their problems. That's more to what I said there, right? So they say, I need help, and then it's their problem. My not breathing kid is the problem. So it's their problem. Everything's framed around themselves. And they accept the victim's death. So if someone calls 911 and says, hey, a guy was just killed. I just heard a gunshot and I went over there and my neighbor's dead. That's also a red flag because of the conclusiveness. They're dead. Have you checked the pulse? People can pull through. Or how do you know they're dead, right? Unless they're decapitated, accepting the victim's death in the throes of an emergency is a red flag. All right, so we have one more section to go, but let's listen to the second McCanns appeal just so we can hear it. And then we'll run it through that filter, and then we'll go through the last bit of this checklist.
We would like to thank everyone here in Portugal, the UK and elsewhere for all your support during this extremely difficult time for our family. We are pleased that the family liaison officer...
Notice how it's an extremely difficult time for our family. Not during this critical time for Madeline. It's a red flag. They are the priority.
From Leicestershire are now working closely with the Portuguese police and in keeping us informed. We have no further information regarding the investigation, but appreciate the significant efforts everyone is making.
No further information. Let's go back to our checklist. No additional facts.
On our behalf. We would again...
Also, look how they say that people are working on their behalf, not on Madeline's behalf.
Investigation, but appreciate the significant efforts everyone is making on our behalf.
On our behalf. They are the subject of the sadness, of the investigation. This is not usual. By our checklist, the victim should be the priority. The focus should be on the victim's survival, not the requester's problem.
We would again like to appeal for any information, however small, that may lead to the safe return of Madeline.
Also notice how they're constantly requesting information, however they're not providing any information. Like I said, Madeline has a distinctive eye fleck. One in how many of 100,000 people have that fleck on her pupil or on her iris. They haven't mentioned it here in either of these early press conferences, which is a huge red flag. It's not useful. The information they're providing is nil. They're not providing any information for people to help find Madeline. But they are talking about themselves. Right? The police are doing this for us. Thank you for investigating on our behalf. Our family is going through a tragedy right now. Instead of saying Madeline is going through a tragedy. In real pleas for help, particularly 911 calls, the focus is on the victim 100%. Okay, so here's our final set of criteria when we're running through this filter. And this is going to be an important video because let's say I've had lots of requests to do John Benet Ramsey or Summer Wells or I think Nicola Bully. I think lots of these cases actually have 911 call recordings. So the first thing we'll do if we start series on any of those, right? So right now we have our ongoing McCanns series, we have our ongoing Amanda Knox series. If we start a series on one of those where there's a 911 call involved, this is the filter I will be running the 911 call through. So at least if you've watched this entire video and shared it around, or if you're a member, you can actually pull this checklist here. You will already be familiar with the checklist I'm going to be running those 911 calls through. So the last series, set of questions in assessing a 911 call, or in our case, assessing a plea for help about a missing child, is how was the call made? And the 4 criteria are voice modulation. We don't look at that sort of stuff here on this channel. I prefer to look strictly at the words people say because I feel like that has the least room for error. I think body language or listening to tone, while it might have benefits, the risks of misinterpretation outweigh the benefits. So in my opinion, it's better to ignore body language, voice tone, etc. entirely than to pick and choose from it, because I think it's too subjective and it's also too emotional. Listening to someone choking up and crying and tears welling in their eyes, if you even allow yourself to consider that, you can get fooled easily, because I'm not a psychopath. That stuff does affect me, obviously. So it's easier for me to go into it saying I'm going to ignore any tears, any cracking of the voice, any shivering, any dramatic displays, emotional displays. It's easier to just tell myself I'm going to ignore it from square one rather than even attempt to analyze it, because it is so persuasive, and if someone's lying, manipulative, it can really sway you. So I prefer to ignore it entirely. All right, so voice modulation is one criteria, however, that the FBI does analyze. Or at least they suggest 911 dispatchers do. The other great tell for an innocent caller is they actually sound rude when they're requesting help. So they do not try to ingratiate themselves at all. They are urgent and they are rude. So if someone calls the police, the police says 911 dispatch, they say, I need help. My kid needs help. Send someone here. Here's the address. Send them now. And the dispatcher says, well, what happened? Do you have the pulse? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. Send someone now. That is actually a sign of an innocent caller, because because they're just relaying the truth. They don't care about making the police like them, which is known as ingratiation. So they don't care if you like them or not because they're telling the truth. They're not trying to persuade you of anything. They're literally just trying to get the police there to do their job, which is to save whoever is in an emergency. Whereas guilty callers are more likely to be polite. So they're more likely to say, hello, 911, what's your emergency? Hi, my husband shot himself. That's a red flag. Or my husband cannot seem to wake up. That's a red flag, because A, there's unnecessary words like hi. This is supposed to be an emergency, a high stress hormone situation, an ongoing situation, and you're taking time to say hi, and not using a contraction. So my husband cannot get up, does not seem to be able to wake up, is also, believe it or not, a red flag. When someone's in the heat of an emergency, they dispense with all the formalities and all the niceties, And they even dispense with using full words. They use contractions. My husband can't wake up. My husband isn't waking up, right? Not my husband is not waking up. So even if something as small as a contraction can be a red flag. So how is the call made? If it's an innocent person, there's more voice modulation, which we will ignore here. The call is urgent and rude. And as you just saw with Jerry, Madeline's been missing for over 24 hours at this point, and he's already taking time to thank all the people who are helping with this, all the police who are involved in the search. It's too early to be thanking them. To me, that is too polite and too patient. Actual parents of missing children are urgent and actually non-ingratiating and rude. If the police have not found your daughter yet, you're pissed off. Don't you guys know how to do your job? She's a little girl in a pink pajamas. You can't find her. Where are the sniffer dogs? Here, I've got her clothes here. Go search everyone's house. I don't care. That is how actual parents of missing children act. They do not take time to thank and applaud the police who haven't found their daughter less than 72 hours after she's gone missing. That is a red flag. The third criteria under how was the call made is cooperation with the dispatcher. So innocent people cooperate with the authorities. They provide information. They answer the questions that are asked of them. Whereas guilty parties resist cooperation. So they don't answer every question. And I've seen lots of comments on my McCann videos of people saying that the McCanns actually refused to answer certain polygraph questions, which is, of course, a giant red flag. If your daughter is missing, your first priority should be to cooperate with the authorities because you didn't do anything wrong. So you would expect them to submit themselves to any degree of investigation, questioning, as embarrassing or humiliating as it is, in order to eliminate themselves as suspects so the police can focus on the actual kidnapper. However, that's not what the McCanns did. They were resistant, and even in the last McCanns video I did, How Repetition Reveals Lies, the interviewer asked them, are there any other details? I think that interview was done like a few weeks after the disappearance. The How Repetition Reveals Lies video I did. The interviewer asked them, are there any other details you've had time to recollect? Anything you noticed? Maybe someone, casing your family a few days before Madeline went missing. And they gave a very odd answer. Jerry said, first of all, both of them said no new details, which I point out in that video. It violates the reminiscence effect. If you want to know what that is, you can watch that video. That video is mainly about the reminiscence effect, a very counterintuitive way to tell if someone's lying. So they said no. And then Jerry actually went on to say, even if we did remember something, it could be important, so I'm not going to tell you. Which is bizarre, which is totally non-cooperative with people who are allegedly trying to help them find their missing daughter. The fourth, and this is actually the most indicative of a guilty caller. The fourth criteria is innocent callers do not have self-interruptions. Guilty callers do. If you see a self-interruption in an emergency appeal or an emergency 911 call, or in this case, an appeal, or even an interview, it's a red flag. What is a self-interruption? A self-interruption is when someone starts answering a question and cuts themselves off and starts saying something different. So, for example, let's say Jerry was asked, what color pajamas was Madeline wearing? Well, she was wearing pink pajamas, but then we gave her a bath and we changed her into, let's see, once again, I don't have a good example here. A self-interruption, because it's so rare, it's when they start answering a question and shift to something else. So if Jerry was asked, how far away was the tapas bar that you guys were eating at? Is 50 meters away. At the tapas bar is 50 meters away, about a 1-minute walk. Well, you couldn't even see the window to our room from where we were sitting. So that really doesn't matter. So that's a self-interruption where he's answering a question about the tapas bar, but then shifts his response to something totally unrelated, like how he could not see the window to his room from where he was sitting. It indicates that they have an agenda, that they want to convince you of something. Why would he mention that he couldn't see the window? All that does is bolster his story that someone came in through that window and stole Madeline. So that's a self-interruption. And if we see one in future videos, I'll be sure to point it out. This is actually the most indicative of a guilty caller, is the self-interruption. So overall, if you're listening to a 911 call or an emergency appeal, like one of these pressers of parents of missing children, these are the criteria you should run it through. There's 11 of them. Innocent caller asks for help for the victim. They provide relevant info, and if the dispatcher asks a question, they answer it clearly, concisely. Their concern is solely for the victim. So they don't say anything, they don't blame the victim, right? Well, he was jumping on the bed as he always does, and he fell and he hit his head. That is a red flag. That is a mother who is calling probably because she hit her son on the head. So there's no victim blaming. And then the updating of facts is actually the sign of an innocent caller. So if at first they say the victim was a man, and then they get closer and see it was a woman, that's an updating, a correction of a fact. Whereas if someone says something that cannot, for example, like the example I gave earlier, right? Well, my baby was breathing just fine for the last few hours. Well, a phone call woke me up a few minutes ago. That is not a correction of facts. That's a conflicting fact, a sign of a fabricated story, a sign of a guilty caller. Innocent callers also request help for the victim. So they request, we should expect the McCanns to say, Maddie needs your help, not we need your help, right? Madeline needs all of our help now because we don't know what's happening to her. But instead, the McCanns say, we need your help. There's a focus on the victim's survival with innocent callers. So innocent callers do not accept that the victim might be dead, which is why there's that very famous meme about if someone referring to their kid in the past tense, it means they're guilty. There's a lot of truth to that. Because if you're referring to the child in past tense, it means you've basically given up on their survival and you likely know that they are dead. And that goes to the next point. Innocent callers do not accept the victim's death. So in the heat of an emergency, unless someone's decapitated, right, clearly dead, someone in an emergency will not accept the victim's death. They don't process it. They're in the state of shock, of emergency, right? They need to just get this person help. So they don't accept. They're very hopeful about them pulling through. Right now, if they're making the call or making an appeal, it's because they believe the person has a chance of surviving, which is the entire point of the appeal. Finally, voice modulation. Innocent callers are urgent and may even come off as rude and unlikable. And that's also another counterintuitive way. You'd expect that honest people would be nice and sweet, but that's not necessarily true. Innocent people aren't lying, so they don't need to persuade you one way or the other. They don't need you to like them because they're in the heat of an emergency. They are not trying to persuade you that they're good people. They actually don't care if you think they're bad people as long as it helps them find their kid, which is yet again another red flag with the McCanns. Lots of their interviews, they express concern about how people are looking at them and judging them and talking about how Madeline might be dead. And they express concern about that, right? They get offended by it or want to put injunctions. In reality, if your kid's actually missing, there is a chance that your kid might be dead. And if an investigator is actually exploring that angle, or an investigative journalist exploring it, why would you put an injunction on that? You would actually be not happy about it, but you'd be happy that someone's investigating another angle about your missing kid. Because at the very least, you might get some closure, or at least retrieve her body to give her a proper burial. But the McCanns do something totally different, where they actually shut down any sort of investigation that doesn't follow their narrative of some mysterious third-party person who stole Madeline, yet left the other two kids and will never be found, and is also a globetrotter, because we've seen them do interviews in Spain and interviews in Sweden. In the last interview we analyzed of them, they were talking about they were about to take a trip across Europe, which is strange. Innocent callers also cooperate, so they're more cooperative. If the dispatcher asks them an embarrassing question, was the old man, did he have a heart attack in the bedroom? Were you guys engaged in sex at the time? I can't answer that. Well, even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. That's not how an innocent person acts. An innocent person would be cooperative, as humiliating as it is. Yes, I was having sex with the 80-year-old man. It looked like he had a heart attack. He needs help. Send someone now. Right? So they are cooperative, even if it embarrasses them, humiliates them, might get them into a little bit of trouble. Well, we were smoking weed and he started acting weird and he flopped onto the floor. Help. Right? So they're cooperative. And finally, there's no self-interruption. So if they start answering your question, they complete the response. They don't halt themselves or stutter and try to change the topic. That is a huge red flag. It means they either have an agenda or they're trying to hide something from the dispatcher, which makes no sense, because if you're calling 911, or in the McCanns case, if you're doing a press conference to the public, you're doing it because you're trying to elicit help. So you should be direct and not hiding anything. And then on the other end, guilty callers, or in this case, I think the McCanns are guilty parents doing a public press conference. There is no request for help for the victim. So the way they phrased it, I believe, was right, we need help in getting Madeline back home. Not Madeline needs our help, and Madeline needs your help in coming back home. Let's listen to that again. So let's listen to both of them again, then we'll go through the guilty checklist.
Last night, the family...
Also, there are lots of famous cases where it could all boil down to the 911 call. For example, I've had requests to do the staircase. I think that entire case boils down to the 911 call that the guy made about his wife allegedly falling down the stairs. If you run it through this criteria, which way does his call end up on the checklist? So the staircase is a case where it could all boil down to a 911 call. Lots of missing children's cases do. I don't know who called 911 on behalf of the McCanns. I couldn't find that call. But let's listen to this appeal here.
Family emerged to make a brief appeal for help from the public. Mrs. McCann clutched a child's toy while her husband spoke.
Words cannot describe the anguish and despair that we are feeling as the parents of our beautiful daughter Madeline. We request...
Words cannot describe the despair we are feeling as the parents of Madeline. Notice how they are the priority.
That anyone who may have any information related to Madeline's disappearance, no matter how trivial, contact the Portuguese police and help us get her back safely.
Help us get her back safely. Not help her get home safely. Or help Madeline help Madeline get back to us. The framing is always on themselves, which is a red flag. Like I said, even something as innocuous as saying, "Hello, 911, I've got a problem. My son isn't breathing," is a red flag. There's a few more signs. For example, repetition is another sign of a guilty caller, which I call scripting, which we've looked at with the McCanns. Liars tend to repeat things a lot because it's a lot easier to script a lie and then stick to it. And in this study on the 911 calls, there's actually a case of a father saying something along the lines of, "My daughter was drinking and then she spat up water and fell on the ground." Or she started throwing up water. Water, water, water. It turned out that the girl was a 4-year-old, was adopted, and she took a sip of her sister's drink, right? So this father's actual daughter. And to punish her, the dad zip-tied her hands behind her back and had her drink something like 64 ounces of water, a big volume of water for such a little kid. And she died of basically too much water in her system, basically death by over drinking water. And that goes to repetition. Water, 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 red flag. If you've seen my videos on the McCanns, you know that they do a lot of repetition. And I think it's because they've scripted their story.
Please, if you have Madeline, let her come home to her.
Right. If you have Madeline. Ever since day one with the McCanns, they have only pushed the angle that she was kidnapped. Notice how he doesn't say, for example, right? That's fine to say, if you have Madeline, we're willing to, please let her come home. We're willing to pay you. We'll forgive you. That's fine. But they don't even allow for the possibility that maybe she wandered away. For example, if you see Madeline on the street, please call the police. She has a eye fleck in her right eye. It's a little black dot. And she was wearing these pajamas. Her hair is auburn colored. You don't see any of that here. And I think even this early on, they scripted their story about the kidnapping. Notice how they don't allow for the possibility that she might have wandered away or anything besides a kidnapping.
Her mummy, daddy, brother and sister. We would like to thank everyone here in Portugal, the UK.
See, this one's a red flag. This is allegedly done on the 6th of May or 5th.
Safely. Please, if you have, we'd like to thank everyone here in Portugal. We would like
so this appeal comes from May 6th. I think that's 1 or 2 days after Madeline went missing. And he's already thanking everybody. Madeline's not found. So if you were looking at the checklist, how was the call made? Would you check urgently, rudely demanding? Or would you check polite and patient? Well, in this case, they're being too polite and too patient. And then also, let's say you went down the voice modulation route. I think lots of you guys will put this in the comments because as much as I don't like body language analysis, lots of you guys drop body language stuff in the comments. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of comments about how the parents are not acting sad enough and their intonation is not strong enough. Also, it is odd that Jerry is doing all the talking. Lots of times in these missing children cases, the mother does the most talking. It's because the mother is, like it or not, the main parent. The motherly instinct is the strongest thing in the world. So it is strange that Kate is not doing the talking. And I think if you don't know my full theory, I believe that the McCanns over-sedated Maddie by accident. I think Kate administered the lethal sedative, and then Jerry took control of the situation, scripted the alibi, put Madeline somewhere cold and dark, maybe a well, maybe a cavern, maybe the ocean inside a suitcase or a compartment. But I think it was Kate who administered the sedative. One reason for that is you see that Jerry does most of the talking. He has most of the composure. Kate is much more distraught, I think, because she is actually the guilty party. She's the one who made the mistake, and now Jerry is doing everything he can to save her and the remaining family members, or the twins, to keep their family unit together. I also think Kate is the guilty one because if it were the other way around, if Jerry had administered the sedative that killed Madeline, I think Kate would have turned on him. That's just the way motherly instinct goes. She would put her kids above anyone, even her husband. So that's why I think it has to be that way. It has to be Kate who did it, and Jerry is defending her and the rest of the kids by making sure they effectively get away with any crime they committed. Because they might go to jail for negligence if it's found that they over-sedated her, and then the twins would be taken away into foster care. So I think that's why Jerry's doing most of the talking here, which is unusual. Typically, it's the mother. In both of these early pressers, we see that Jerry is the only one talking, and he's reading off a script. And I think that's because he is a little bit more composed because he's in fight or flight mode, and he switched into fight mode. He scripted the story, and he's doing whatever he can now to protect the family, whereas Kate is still... And also, Kate stopped practicing medicine, which to me is another indicator that she no longer trusts herself because she administered the lethal dose. So Jerry, in this second presser, is still doing all the talking, which is a red flag. Typically, it's the mother in these situations. And he's thanking the police too early. They haven't found Madeline yet. They don't even have a suspect yet. But yet he's thanking them. Really, deep down, he might be thanking them because he's thankful they didn't capture him. He has a lot to be grateful for. The fact that they didn't pursue him as strongly as they should have.
Everyone here in Portugal, the UK, Daddy, brother and sister.
So
we would like to thank everyone here in Portugal, the UK and elsewhere for all your support during this extremely difficult time for our family.
For our family. Once again, not for Madeline. So if we run this through the checklist, there's no urgent demanding. The focus is not on the victim. There's no concern for the victim. And there's actually no request for help for the victim in this second one. He's thanking them like the search is over, like they've actually, like it's case closed, which is not the case at all. So he's polite and patient. No request. He's thanking people.
We are pleased that the family liaison officers from Leicestershire are now working closely with the Portuguese police.
They're pleased. There's nothing to be pleased about. If it were my kid, I'd be saying, you still haven't found my kid. What are we doing here? Go find my kid. Instead, they're over here they're popping the champagne.
And in keeping us informed. We have no further information regarding the investigation.
And then once again, no further information. No relevant information.
But appreciate the significant efforts everyone is making on our behalf.
Right? They appreciate everyone in Portugal. Well, isn't one person in Portugal the kidnapper, according to their story? How are they thanking everyone in Portugal? So they're thanking everyone in Portugal. They're thanking the people in the UK police, the Portuguese police. It's a whole litany of people they're thanking, and Madeline still isn't here yet. It's too early for this.
We have no further information regarding the investigation.
And once again, they they have the media's attention here. What do? They focus on ingratiating themselves with the locals and with the police, rather than describing Madeline, rather than making another plea to the kidnapper. And I know some of you guys think, well, you're looking way too deep into this. Right, DD, you're clutching at straws. No, this is a routine analysis. These are not advanced liars. This is literally, if anyone had run this checklist on them, the red flags are all over the place with this case. Even if this were the only thing I had seen of the McCanns, it would be a red flag to me. That's my point, that the McCanns are, for example, I see lots of conspiracy theories in the comments. You know, the McCanns have friends in high places. That's why they get away with it. I don't think it's necessarily that nefarious. I think the people who want to believe the conspiracy theories aren't too different from the people who think they're innocent. In reality, no one wants to believe that 2 doctors killed their kid. You don't want to believe it. So part of the people just don't believe it and say they're innocent, and they ignore the red flags. And then the other part of people don't want them to just be 2 normal doctors. They want them to be villains, right? Well, they did nasty stuff to Madeline. I haven't seen any evidence of that besides maybe being a little bit too lax with medication with her. It seems like they routinely sedated her, which is odd, which is bad. But it's not a villain, right? So some people just say, hey, you're looking too deep into this. They're innocent. She was kidnapped. And the same type of people, but on the other side, want them to be evil, nefarious villains, right? They did nasty stuff to Madeline. They sold her into slavery. I don't see any of that. I just see 2 parents who were too lax with administering a sedative to their daughter. And then in their mind, right? I'm not saying I think this is what I would do or even a good thing to do. But in their mind, they had to make a decision. Do we come forward and admit we screwed up and lose both of our medical licenses and potentially be locked up in a Portuguese prison for manslaughter and let our twins go into foster care? That's one option. Or do we lie? Do we hide the body and keep our family unit together and look at the silver lining that Madeline's death was not in vain? We will spend the rest of our lives raising awareness about missing children. Yes, that's what we'll do. And we'll take any money we make and put the twins through college. Okay, yeah, that's what we'll do. And basically convince, and stick together as a family unit. And we will take this lie to our graves. I think that's just what happened. I don't think there's some evil caricature supervillains who did all this nasty stuff to Madeline, nor do I think they're innocent. I think they're 2 relatively normal people who were put in a tragic, scary situation and were put into fight or flight mode and decided to lie rather than come clean. And now they're dealing with that. And I see lots of comments asking, well, do you think we'll get a deathbed confession from them? No. I don't think we will ever get a deathbed confession from them, because confessing on their deathbed will only put the twins into trouble, right? People will be pestering the twins. Did you know your parents were killers? Right? So the fallout can only hurt the twins. So I don't think there will be any deathbed confession. I think if people had been objective and run the McCanns through the checklist, the red flags were there. I think any FBI analyst would have seen the signs, but the FBI was not involved in this case, obviously. So what you had were people who did not want to believe that these 2 seemingly normal parents killed their daughter. It's a lot easier to just tell yourself, well, she was kidnapped and she'll be found. because at least that way the story has a happy ending. From all the analysis I've done on McCanns, there is no happy ending. It's just, that's life. Will we ever find her body? Probably not. But at this point.
But appreciate the significant efforts everyone is making on our behalf.
Right? The significant efforts everyone is making on our behalf. They are the focus. The focus is not Madeleine. They should be saying on Madeleine's behalf. And they should be saying her name. I don't know if they said her name once in this second presser. You know, thank you for everyone who's out there looking for Madeleine. There's a fleck in her eye. If you see that fleck, please call the Portuguese police. Call us. If you have her, please just drop her off at the nearest police station. We won't ask any questions. We won't pursue you. We'll pay you. Just let us know what you want.
We would again like to appeal for any.
Also, if you don't give her back, please don't hurt her. Right? Total priority for the victim.
Information, however small, that may lead to the safe return of Madeleine.
That may, so he finally said her name right at the end there. That may lead to the safe return of Madeleine. Overall, I think, like I said, I'm shoehorning this analysis into this video, but I think this will be a benchmark video for future ones where we actually analyze 911 calls, because now you'll have the tools. If you're a member, I'll continue adding extra materials here in the member section for you. If you're not a member yet, please consider joining. All you have to do is just hit the join button on my YouTube page, and you can sign up as a member and join in the live chats during the premieres. You get extra content. And you can also use fun, cool emojis, which I've created for the channel, in the live chat or in the comments, and also get a little Deception Detective badge, basically progressing from a little baby, fresh-faced Deception Detective to getting the beard, to getting the glasses and the beard. Well, actually, you start off baby-faced with the hat, then you get the hat and beard, hat, beard, glasses, hat, beard, glasses, headphones. Then you get the mic, and then you turn golden, and it's just fun. So if you want to participate in that, please consider becoming a member. And you can also download this checklist for future videos. Let me know if there's any good 911 call cases you want me to analyze. We could add that to a series. I'm also continuing the Amanda Knox series, so make sure to subscribe if you want to get notifications when I add the next section to that. And of course, the McCanns series is ongoing. This is one of my favorite series just because there's so many lessons to teach in this situation. So make sure to subscribe if you want to be updated on that. Until next time, stay true.